Hi, folks. This is Dr. Todd. Welcome to another episode of the Dr. Todd Podcast. Thank you very much for joining me again. And if this is your first time listening, welcome. Today, I want to talk about the myth in the marketplace of ideas that there is this kind of wise self or some kind of authentic self that exists within us, that when we're confused or we find ourselves doing self-destructive behaviors or not acting in ways that we would like, that there is this higher evolved inner self that we can just reflect back on or get in touch with to give us some guidance about what to do. And I hear this all the time not only in the field of psychology, that somehow there's this inner wise self that gets buried by our fears and our self-defeating thoughts and all of that kind of stuff. And you see this also in a lot of the kind of the psych self-help realm. And I don't think it's a particularly helpful idea that somehow within us there is this just inherent, good, highly evolved self for two reasons. One is that it's just not how the brain works. It's not how the sense of self works. It's not how the sense of self develops. And two, I think it leads people down a path where they can feel like, oh, well, if I'm still struggling, somehow I'm not able to get in touch with this mythical inner self that can really give me some guidance, or I just need to find this inner sense of self who is awesome and just reveal that to the world. And if I just had enough courage and if I just worked hard enough, then I could find that inner part of me that's so amazing and just bring it to the world. And it gets us when people feel that or think that, really gets us focused on the wrong things. And let me explain that a little bit more, because I think this is an important idea to understand. The way that the sense of self evolves is through our experience with other people reflecting information back to us about who we are. And this begins in very, very early childhood, when our parents are the first ones, or the adults in our lives are the first ones who give us feedback, and in particular around 5 different areas. The first is whether we are valued, whether we are safe, kind of who we are and what our identity is, whether we have a sense of agency, and whether we have a sense of connection or belonging. And those things are communicated to us through the behavior and the words of the people around us. And in early childhood, it's the adults, like I mentioned, and our parents and caregivers. And as we get a little bit older and we start interacting with other kids and all of that, we get that also get that information from our peers. And part of the whole differentiation of the sense of self comes from our interaction with peers and adults, so we can kind of figure out what we're good at, who we are, what our likes are, whether we are valued and belong, and all of those kinds of things. And depending on our experience in childhood, we will enter into adulthood with either a well-developed inner core, or what I call the core self, which is made up of these 5 components, right? This sense of identity, the sense of connection, the sense of safety, a sense of value, and a sense of agency. And I want to go through each of those just briefly, just so you understand what those are and why they're important to this whole sense of self that we develop. The first one is the sense of identity. And that sense of identity, the way to think about it is, how am I different and differentiated from the people around me? What is it that I like? What is it that I value? What is it that I think? What is it that I like to do? What am I good at? And these are things that are mirrored back to us by the people around us. So, for example, part of our identity is that we're smart. That is because the people around us have just said, "Wow, you are really smart." When we get tests back, we do better than most of the other kids. And so there's this internalized sense of identity of being smart. And part of that is like, not only are we smart, but just even preferences, like what do we like? If we are constantly like dismissed or belittled or shamed for liking certain things, for example, there will be a part of us that won't feel safe to even express an opinion or express some preference for one thing over another. Say we grow up with parents and in a family who is super, super into country music, and the reality is that the first time we listened to heavy metal, we were like, man, I really dig that. I really like heavy metal. But every time we try to play that, or every time we express an interest in listening to heavy metal, we are mocked and ridiculed. People don't allow us to listen to it, or we are made to feel bad somehow. Then we develop this internalized sense of, well, what I like is not okay. And that affects our sense of identity, because then we enter into adulthood just with this inner sense of, well, what I like doesn't matter, and what I want to do is not the right thing. And so I will just look to others and just do what they want to do, and like what they like, even though secretly I may feel a bit different. And sometimes that can be significant enough where we enter into adulthood, where somebody will say, well, what do you like? And we could look inward and just really have no idea. It's like, to be honest, I can't tell you what I like. I can tell you some things that make me upset, but it's like, it has never been okay for me to have an opinion. I was never supported by that or for that. If anything, I was made to feel bad, sick, or wrong for having a desire, for having a preference, for having a dream, for wanting to do something. And so now in adulthood, that sense of me as having like a coherent sense of who I am and how I show up in the world and what I like and what I don't like is largely absent. And similarly, with this sense of connection, if we grow up in an environment where we always feel distant, where there's not a lot of emotional engagement with our parents, they could even be around, they could even be like physically present and engaged, but if they are not emotionally engaged with us, if we don't have siblings that we feel close to, if we are not in an environment where there are a lot of other kids, or as we get into teenage years, a lot of other people who are really close to us, then there's just this kind of sense of disconnection from others. And how that can show up in adulthood is we show up in environments, and like going to a party, we can enjoy being there and enjoy the stimulation and having some conversations, but there's always this sense that there's some kind of connection between other people that we are not part of, that somehow we are disconnected or we are alienated from everybody else, and that we don't belong to the club somehow. We are not, everybody else has some kind of inner secret or some kind of connection between each other that we just don't have. And so there's always this, just kind of this sense that we may have to study how other people interact and try to mimic that to approximate what would normally be an intuitive sense of just being present and being able to connect. If we grew up where we didn't have a good sense of that emotional connection, we may find it hard to just hang out with people. So just having people over and just hanging out and just being present with them will feel somehow like awkward and like, I don't know exactly how to do that. I could entertain, I could be on stage. I oftentimes will have a repertoire of some conversation things that I can engage in with other people, and we could have a fun conversation. But a lot of that can oftentimes feel performative. And when we don't have that good internalized sense of connection, if, after a certain point, after the kind of our repertoire of conversation starters or, kind of our conversation language, we kind of run out of stuff to say, then we can all of a sudden feel like we hit a bit of a wall, and all of a sudden it's like, I don't know where to go from here. I need to like go talk to somebody else, or I don't know how to just remain present in silence and feel like I am just here with everybody else and I am part of that. I am part of that community. That third part of that internal sense of self, and I call these things the 5 core needs, is a sense of safety. When we grow up in an environment where we feel very safe, we feel very protected, we feel very supported by the adults and the other people around us, we develop this internal sense that the world is, and people are pretty trustworthy. I mean, we may have some experiences with icky people, but for the most part, we just see the world as a fairly safe place and that we're okay and that people are essentially good. And when we come into adulthood, we are not necessarily overly wary of anybody. We don't necessarily experience a lot of anxiety when we are around crowds of people who we don't know. We are not necessarily anxious with the thought of being out in public or meeting new people, or even sharing some of our story, or sharing a ride somewhere and things like that. But when we grow up in an environment that does not feel safe, I will always be a bit mistrustful of everybody else. I will always be waiting for the next shoe to drop. It's like, well, when things are going well, I don't want to get too excited because something bad is going to happen. Every time I get a little bit excited, that ends up in disappointment, or I end up being hurt. And so I don't want to get too excited. I don't want to get excited about going on a trip or starting a new career or doing any of that, because my experience growing up is that bad stuff just tends to always happen. And so the way that I engage the world is very kind of keeping everything at an arm's length and being very apprehensive about letting people in or trusting people or trusting situations or trusting the world that things are going to be okay. Another part of the self, that fourth part of the self, has to do with value. And the way we experience being valued when we are children not only is being taught by by our parents, or our parents saying to us, I love you, I value you, things like that. Because those words are important, but what's even more important is the attention of our parents, the other adults in our life, and the other people around us, whether they are siblings or friends or whatever. When people pay attention to us, that communicates to us that we matter to them. And that is what starts to develop an internalized sense of self-esteem, that I matter in the world. Because when people spend their time and attention with me, that is communicating to me that I matter. And when it's like everybody else is busy doing their own thing and I feel like I'm kind of ignored, or that I'm not really, it doesn't really matter much if I'm here or not, we start to internalize this sense that we are just not valued, and that we just don't, in some respects, just don't matter. It's like a lot of suicides are because people feel like it just doesn't really matter if I'm on this planet or not. No one would care if I was gone. It just wouldn't matter, right? And that comes from the experiences that we had growing up, and we internalize those and come into adulthood integrating all of those experiences about whether we matter or not. And so there is a part of our internal self that either develops what we call a positive sense of self-esteem, right? That I'm valued and I matter, and there's some kind of inherent dignity in me, and there's some kind of inherent value in me that other people recognize. That, when I'm sitting alone, I still feel like really good about myself. I feel like I matter, and even if I am going through a tough time, I feel like other people care about me and that I matter to them. And that last part of the core sense of self, that fifth dimension of our core identity or a core sense of self, is the need for a sense of agency. Now, I should explain what agency means. Agency is essentially the sense of having some personal power, that I have the ability to affect my environment. If I set a goal, I can reach it. If I want something, I can get it. If I, if I want to learn something, I can learn it. That sense of agency is really about, do I feel competent? Do I feel capable? Do I feel like I can affect myself in the world around me? And when we grow up in a world where no matter what we do, no matter what we try, nothing ever seems to work out, there's always something that undermines our ability to accomplish something, then we develop this internalized sense of helplessness, and we call this learned helplessness. Julian Rotter, many, many years ago, like in the 1970s, was a researcher and came up with this whole concept of internal versus external locus of control. And essentially what locus means is location of control. So someone with an internal sense of control would have this sense that the events and the outcomes of my life are because of things that I do. So I am the one who creates my reality. I'm the one who creates my success. I am the one who creates my own failures and struggles. Someone with an external locus of control, it has this sense of, I am the victim of circumstance. It's like everything that is wrong in my life is because of events outside of me and of forces outside of me. And I am within a system that, for whatever reason, has just selected me to be the one who is going to always fail, and nothing is ever going to go well, and all of that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, some of the conversations that are happening in the marketplace of ideas right now about, what I call this kind of grievance industry is really manufacturing this sense of external locus of control, that if you didn't get the job, it was because of external forces. If somebody didn't treat you well, it was because of external forces. If you are unhappy, it's because of external forces. And what that does is that sets up this whole feeling of learned helplessness, that it doesn't matter what I do, it doesn't matter what I try, because the world outside of me is structured and organized in a way that will keep me from being able to be successful. Research that has been done on people who have an external locus of control versus an internal locus of control is that those with an internal locus of control are much, much happier. They're much more accomplished. They're able to do a lot of stuff. And those with an external locus of control oftentimes struggle with anxiety, depression, anger, outrage, and just this overall sense of failure and helplessness. And so that's internalized sense of agency is also very, very important. Now, I talk about those 5 elements of our core self-concept, right? Because when we enter into adulthood and we are struggling because there is a part of us that hasn't developed well because of how we grew up or was damaged through trauma or through neglect or through circumstances that were beyond our control when we were growing up, we can enter into adulthood with parts of our sense of self that are not very well developed or are, we could even say, wounded. So, for example, you might feel extremely competent and extremely capable in some areas of your life, but still have this internalized sense that you're a worthless human being. Even though you can do all this amazing stuff and you have all these abilities, there's still maybe this internalized sense if people really knew you, they would know how unlovable you are, right? Or you may feel, very connected with other people and all of that, but still struggle with this sense of helplessness. Like, I have to rely on what everybody else wants to do. And whatever they want to do is fine. I feel a sense of belonging. I feel a sense of connection, but it's like I can never, I just don't feel comfortable taking the lead. I don't feel comfortable expressing my opinion. I'm much more content just going with what everybody else wants to do, because showing up and expressing an opinion is something that is very anxiety provoking because of my history. Or it's like whenever I have tried to do something that I wanted to do, it never turned out well. So I've just learned that I'm just going to follow everybody else and then everything is fine, right? And so we can have this mix of parts of ourself that are well developed, where we really excel. We may feel, like clear sense of identity. We may have a really strong sense of internalized agency, like we can accomplish anything, but also feel extremely disconnected and isolated. And even when we're in a room of people and everybody is, telling us how great we are and all of that, we could still be sitting in there with a real sense of just disconnection and struggle with I don't know how to just hang out with people. I mean, I could sit there and I could dazzle them with all the cool stuff I could do, but if it just came down to just being present and hanging out, I have no intuitive sense of how to do that because that part of myself didn't develop well when I was growing up. Now let's compare that to this whole idea that, there is this authentic, wise self inside here, and all of your struggles are just because you're not getting in touch with that and bringing that out. It's just like, man, that's just not how things work. The reality is that there is no hidden authentic self inside you. There is no wise self inside you. The reality is that you have this mix of these 5 core needs, this sense of identity, the sense of connection, the sense of safety, the sense of value, the sense of agency. These 5 things are the components of your sense of self that either developed well or didn't. And the key to really developing and evolving in life is not to somehow reflect and try to get in touch with some wise self that doesn't exist, but rather identify where are some of the areas where you seem to struggle, like that sense of connection, so to speak. Or is it that kind of this sense of helplessness or this externalized locus of control? Or is it that you don't really have a clear sense of self, and so you kind of act like a chameleon in different environments where you kind of read the room and then sort of take on the beliefs and behavior patterns of whoever you're around, or is it that you don't have a good sense of value, that you just have this internalized sense of unworthiness or unlovability, and that if people really knew you, they would know how unlovable or how broken you are, or how much they were like, ooh, I don't want to be around you, right? And none of those parts of ourself can be healed unless we start to identify the patterns of our experience when we show up in the world, so we can identify which one of those 5 are really undermining our sense of happiness and joy and success in life. And once we figure that out, then we're equipped to start implementing a plan of action to start creating new experiences. Because remember, we talked in the very beginning that our sense of self is developed through experience. It's not developed through a sense of self. There's not some innate wise self that was just implanted there by the universe, right? It is developed through our experience growing up. And we can reshape our experience in adulthood by being very intentional about who we surround ourselves with, the situations we put ourselves in, so that we can start developing some different experiences where we do feel a sense of belonging, where we do feel a sense of value, where people pay attention to us, and not just because we're entertaining them or that we have something big to offer, but that they're just genuinely interested in us as human beings. We can start expressing our preferences and things that we like and stepping outside of our comfort zone and deciding maybe even something as simple as, you know what, why don't we all go to blah, blah, blah for dinner, and start just creating some new experiences. And if we do that, we can totally heal that core sense of self. And that's really when much of that internal healing takes place. It's through us taking specific action to create new experiences, because those experiences are going to be the things that will actually change our core sense of self. Not affirmations that we tell ourselves in the mirror, and not just challenging, self-defeating thoughts and all of that. I mean, some of that can be helpful, but none of that will be as powerful as when we can create specific, meaningful experiences. Those are the things that are going to start changing our insides. So I hope that you found some of this helpful, and we'll see you in the next episode.